issue, it was an 8-year gig that was completely stable. Our sales were always really, really good. We made really good money off of it. But when it was over, when I realized, holy crap, this is coming to an end, I probably should like come up with something else. That was kind of, you know, a panicky moment.
After 2, like, we'll see.
right. Like I have to like make new stuff. I came to this place in January of last year where I was coming up with different ideas, kind of going back to old ideas, and nothing was what I wanted to do. I was so passionate about any of it. So this new thing I came up with just kind of emerged out of nowhere. Kind of after I kind of given up hope, this thing just kind of popped up, and from there it started with this germ of an idea, and an interesting visual that was in my head that I thought was cool, and from there it kind of took on a life of its own. And I think when you're making work that's personal, which is what I'm interested in, like I have to make work I care about, it has to be based on, there's some elements of it that are very true to my own life. I mean, without getting too much into what the book's about, you know, in my life right now, the stage of life I'm in right now, I have 3 really young kids. We're in a really early phase of our lives, and in this new book I'm doing, that's a big part of it. It's a very family-centric book. So that took on a huge part of it. But it's been completely daunting to kind of like slowly gestate this thing over the last year, and then last December I wrote the entire first issue, and then from there, each character just kind of grew, and I had an outline of what it was going to be, but it really took on a life of its own. So that's kind of like a broad overview, kind of like how the idea went from, you know, just literally a seedling of an idea of me walking around my house, and then an idea popping in my head, to me writing it down, and then it grew, the characters emerged, and then I wrote the script, and then I went from the script and I drew the first issue. So that's my process, at least.
And for your stuff, I mean, you know, I think to describe it as sci-fi is accurate, but any Michael Crichton fans in here? Okay, I like Michael Crichton. But I think your stuff definitely has more of an emerging science quality to it, like a pure science fiction. So I think that's kind of cool. And I think people that are fans of that Michael Crichton stuff would be like Sphere, Westworld, stuff like that.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, emerging science versus far off science fiction. So.
Yeah, and I mean for me, like, without revealing what the story is, what was interesting to me was the idea of, you know, what if the next cutting edge scientific discovery came from here, where a place where no one would expect it to come from? What if it like popped up here, and how would that influence the economy, and how would that influence like the world really? So that's a big part of what the story is.
Cool, that's awesome. Yeah. I kind of talked a little bit about mine, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. The origin of it just being a sort of, you know, taking a piece out of something that didn't work and creating something new from that. But you know, to sit down and look at a blank sheet of paper and create something, I think is sort of the way people think it happens. But I think what really happens is, for both of us, our heads are just totally filled with ideas, and it's more of a elimination process. It's like, okay, of the millions of things going on, let me pick out the things, like kind of like the fruit on a tree that are ripe, and you kind of pick them, and that sort of becomes the project. You know, I think when you talk with writers, especially, that's the way most of it works. It's not about looking at the blank page and seeing something. It's about starting to eliminate other things and just keeping what's kind of left over. You know. But for me, I mean, having read your stuff, I've kind of seen it in my stuff too. I always try to find a way to connect a part of me to each of the characters in the story. So in my story, the lead character was a cop who kind of got kicked out and starts a business as a private eye and slowly gets pulled into organized crime. Now, I've never experienced that, but I did start my career in advertising, and I got kicked out. I started a design studio and then transitioned from design into comics. So I know about that part. And so the parallel career path of like the risk and the fears and the financial worry of making those jumps from, I mean, imagine leaving one business and going to work for another business and doing the same job. That alone is scary. Imagine leaving a career behind completely and starting an entirely new career. You know, that's a whole different level of jump. So I understood that, and so that part of me is in my character. So I definitely try to do stuff like that. So have you kind of pulled that? I mean, I know you talked about the kids and stuff a little bit.
Yeah.
But emotionally, like the fears you have in life and stuff, have you started injecting some of that?
Yeah, I mean, most of the characters, and what's weird is the stuff that has kind of emerged that I didn't expect. Like the characters I assumed that I would identify the most with, the characters that would be the most obvious like metaphor for like me, I don't really like all that much. So like my character, who I am, started coming out in characters I didn't expect. Like there's a character that's essentially kind of like the villain, sort of, and there's parts of me that came out in that character that I didn't really expect. But yeah, that completely was unexpected and super just organic, and it made for a way richer story and a way more challenging to tell. You know, it wasn't just a one-sided, like, I'm going to tell my version of this story the way I want to. It just started morphing and becoming its own thing.
You're playing for the format. You have a format?
Yeah, yeah. I'm picturing it as a 20 to 30 issue story. I mean, I always work with an ending in mind. Even with Chew, which was 64 issues, we always had an ending in mind.
Yeah, I remember, like, when you decided to go full-time after issue 5, you guys wanted to do 60 right away.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's all the books that we really care about the most. Like Why the Last Man and Transmetropolitan, they were all 60-issue kind of finite stories. So we were always
like in TV, everyone's going in 5 or 6 years and then stopping. Like,
right.
You rarely see a 7th year anymore. So
right.
Yeah. It's a nice well-rounded. So I wrote 14 issues out completely. That's kind of the end of my storyline, but I'll probably break it and do 7 and 7 in the paperbacks. That's sort of my format. But we were talking a little bit about the Dark Horse model of Hellboy, Sin City, The Goon, where those creators go off and do something, they come back and they do another arc in that world, and maybe go do something else, come back and do another arc in that world. And it's becoming more and more popular, I think, than just the straight ongoing of kind of doing self-contained seasons, I guess, in the world, and then have a nice hard ending.
I mean, I don't know how you would make it work, but I've always been kind of fascinated with, like, essentially like how Netflix does television, somehow translating that to comics. The way that Netflix will drop an entire season in one day. I would love to do that with a comic book outside of a graphic novel. I don't know how you would translate that, but it's something I think is a brilliant idea.
So one of the differences between the big two, Marvel, DC, and the stuff we do is that Marvel has an entire machine that pushes books and promotes books and gives comps, and they do all this crazy stuff for in-store demos, and they get posters and all that. At Image, anything that happens with our books at Image, we do. So one of the reasons why we haven't seen a Sweets hardcover yet is because I've been working, I haven't pulled it together yet. And there's some back matter I'm trying to get together. And so at Christmas, I'm going to try to actually take 2 weeks and try to pull that together. But Image doesn't have that army of people to do stuff. Image is a very small front office. They're mostly just logistics. They kind of, when you do something, they'll push it to the next thing, but they don't really do stuff. Like any book design, logo design, lettering, we all kind of handle that, or we hire people ourselves to kind of run that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really small operation. I think people will be surprised because they do so many books. They really are. I mean, 18, 19 people in an office, and they've expanded quite a bit in the 8 years I've been with them. Yeah. But they're still super small.
Well, I have a lot of friends that work in film and TV full time, and I know 2 writers in particular that have gone 20 years. They work full time, they earn a great living in writing, and they've never had anything made, and they're incredibly frustrated. Can you imagine that? You write, nothing ever gets made, especially the features. The magic of comics is that when we finish a book and put it on the server, it's on the shelf in 4 weeks. Yeah. Right? It's pretty incredible. Like the system works, the machine works, and it's pretty amazing, and that's international distribution. That's not Louisiana. That's, we're on the shelf in Europe in 4 weeks. It's a crazy process.
Yeah. So I guess like the thing I'd be curious to talk about next is the question I get more than anything else, which is when I tell people what I do for a living, especially locally, people are always kind of taken aback and they don't.
They want to know what your real job is, right?
That's my real job, and like where do you sell this? Do you sell this in like your basement? Or like how does that work?
So what do? You go to comic shops and try to talk to them about issues?
Right. Like most people don't know that. Like our stuff is all over the world. Like we make it here and we live here, but like we just email it off to our publisher, in California or New York or whatever, and they print it and they distribute it all over the world in bookstores, comic shops. We have our books are translated in multiple languages all over the world. Like people don't realize that we do that here and that's even possible as a job.
Right. So traditionally, I mean, even in as recent as the 80s, if you wanted to work in comics, you kind of had to move to New York.
Yeah.
You hear Frank Miller talk about those stories where he was sending stuff out, couldn't ever get anything back, and finally packed up, moved to New York, and just like crashed the editor's office and finally got some work. And that's kind of the way it was done. It's still that way in Hollywood mostly, except for guys like us that can option material and kind of do it from the perimeter. But if you want to write TV, you got to be in LA. If you want to write features and do those meetings, you have to be in LA. comics is kind of magical in that it's amazing that no one cares, which is awesome, because everywhere else they kind of do care, but in comics, no one really cares. Like, if you see someone's work and it's great, you buy it. A lot of times, I don't even know where people live. I don't know where Kirkman lives. Where's Kirkman live?
He's in LA now. I mean, he's from Kentucky, but like, he lives in LA now.
But he started his empire while still in Kentucky. He's writing on the show now, so he has to go to LA. But that's kind of just the way it works. You know, you don't really care or know, and that's pretty magical. You know, it's a crazy thing. Comics. Yeah.
Q&A.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions on anything? No questions?
Man, this is the easiest panel I've ever had to do in my life. I just have to sit here and listen to these guys. They're amazing. Who's got the first question? Let's do it.
Hey. You were talking about getting into comics. I actually have an idea for a comic. Where do I get started? I can do the writing, but I can't do the artwork, and I don't know where.
That's not true.
I can't do the artwork. I can't do the artwork yet. Then, okay. I've got to work up to being able to do that. Where would I get started trying to get that comic together and getting it to somebody?
Well, I mean, as an artist, I mean, I think the first step would be you need to write it down. Like, I would write it all down. You know, write up a script or whatever. You know, make a nice presentation. Comic Cons are a good place to hook up with artists because there's tons. I mean, when we were starting out, I know for me at least, for the first 7 or 8 years, I was just going to Comic Cons, just showing my stuff, trying to meet people. And I think more and more that's. I mean, there's tons of those guys who are looking for someone to hook up with, who are artists that aren't writers, who are looking for somebody to hook up with and make some stuff. So conventions are a good place to go to. Other than that, I mean, I don't know so much now. I remember back in the day when I was starting out in the early 2000s, there were lots of message boards and whatnot where like people would hook up, and I met numerous people that I hooked up with creatively. I met on message boards.
Yeah, I think DeviantArt's still around, Pencil Jack's still around, Digital Webbing, I think still has some new stuff online, but yeah, I mean, I think the first thing, like Rob said, I mean, even the guys that write and draw their own stuff for the most part still do scripts because it's just easier and more efficient to rewrite a paragraph than to redraw a page. It just makes sense, you know, to get that story right before you draw it. But I always say there are only 2 steps to doing comics. Make a good comic is the first step, and show it to the right people is the second step. Most people reverse those. They try and show stuff to people with the hope they can get permission to make a comic, and that's kind of backwards. So you have to make a comic, and you know, as a proof of concept back in 2004, I did a photo collage comic with no drawing at all, just a photocopier, photographs, and